Hello, my name is Anoa Changa.
The Way with Anoa. The Way with Anoa.
Good evening, everybody. How are you? Yay! It is February 1st. Oh, we're getting so much closer to spring again. If you were in the southern states like me, then you probably had some pretty decent weather. I mean, you may have had pretty good weather elsewhere too, but I'm excited because that means our spring is like really close. Welcome to this edition of The Way with Noah. If you guys caught me on Sunday, Brandon and I chopped it up a bit about some of the stuff going on. We've seen, the Muslim ban, the travel ban that was put into place by I can't even call him POTUS. But so there's a lot going on as always. So much happening today. Rex Tillerson was confirmed for Secretary of State. There are some people who want to primary the Democrats who voted for him. I think there are people out there who really fundamentally don't understand these corporatist Democrats and how they haven't been allowed to exist. I'm sure some of you have not paid attention to people like Joe Manchin previously, but he was my governor. He was my senator. He's always been a mess. He continues to be a mess. You can't primary him, and had some really productive conversations before he came online. But primarying Joe Manchin is not going to happen successfully without local leadership. It has to be a local, state-driven. It can't be some top-down organization saying we need to get rid of him. It has to be from people on the ground who are out there, and they need resources put behind them. Because do not have people out in West Virginia, do not have folks out in North Dakota, to primary the senator out there. Do not have these people in these really like struggling, rural areas out there grinding if you're not prepared to back them up. Like that's just what I want to say. Same thing when we're talking about having, going into urban communities and trying to get people to really go up against entrenched leadership. You have to be prepared. If we're going to be saying to people that we need people to be leaders, we need to primary folks, we have to be prepared. These national organizations are saying we're going to do this, we're taking on the party. You have to be prepared to have people's backs. Like I remember when we were in West Virginia, and I remember before we left, getting started to get really loud about certain things environmentally. I remember family members and classmates like, yo, please be careful driving home at night. Like the coal industry, the energy, the natural gas energy, yo, they worry about thugs in Chicago. I be worried about thugs like them. Okay. Like it's no joke. If you want people going into the southern coal fields, you really got to be prepared to put in the resources and manpower to support those efforts. And you got to have people's backs. You can't just have them out there dangling. You can't go in there just to make a point. You got to be serious about winning. But that's a whole nother side. Like that's, these come in, everybody talks a lot of really big talk about, this, that, and the other. We're going to do this going into the election. If what you're doing and what you're building is not about empowering people locally, if it's not about building up local leadership, working with individuals, and you're trying to put some top-down 50,000 foot view on stuff, you will not be successful. That's just where it's born. I mean, plain and simple. So what I wanted to talk about tonight, and what I am going to talk about tonight, and I have some cool people come on and talk with me, and I'm really, really excited for the sister who's getting ready to come in and join us. Again, this weekend we saw an outpouring, and it doesn't matter. No, I'm not Muslim. I do not have refugees in my immediate family. I am not an immigrant immediately. My grandparents' were first generation. Their parents were immigrants on my dad's side. My mother's family were slaves. But that does not mean that what has happened over the weekend, and really the expansive nature that the order took beyond those 7 countries, right, that were listed in the initial ban. Like what happened this weekend, what continues to happen from these different executive orders to the fakery that was the Black History Month. I don't know what Trump called it this morning with his circle of coons around him. Like seriously, it does not matter. It all affects us. We're all people. It all affects us. I'm not going to sit here and say that immigrant issues aren't my issues because I'm Black and blah blah blah. That's people who say stuff like that, because there are people saying dumb stuff like that. It's dumb. It's just dumb. Like tyranny, oppression. We can't talk about Black liberation. We can't talk about lifting up Black people if we stand by and watch, other people have atrocities happening to them. So this weekend, I watched and heard accounts of mothers being taken away from their children. I mean, there's an account of a Detroit family. The mom died waiting to be cleared. There's another account of a baby that was taken away from her mother. The mother was only a legal resident. The child was a U.S. citizen. The child was a 10-month-old or 11-month-old who was breastfeeding and was separated from her mother. Like, this is where we're at right now, of the level of insanity, right? And so it doesn't matter who voted for whom. I don't really care. Doesn't matter, what you personally think about illegal immigration. I don't really care. Doesn't really matter at this moment right now what Barack Obama did and didn't do. I don't really care. In the grand scheme of things, these are all things that we need to talk about. These are all points of consideration. But right now, we're talking about these needs for mass mobilization and getting information out, right? And not just, and again, we all can't be so focused on this one hyper, egregious incident, because there's a whole bunch of other things coming down, right? We have more executive orders expect to come down. There are thoughts about net neutrality being affected coming up soon. But at the same time, we do need to have these conversations to start getting a better understanding of how do we build out movements? How do we build out coalitions, collaborations, teamwork, right? To be able to address what's coming down the pipeline. Because whether this particular incident affects you specifically, there's going to be something, and you're going to wish you had a squad standing with you to resolve it. And this is how we begin to build that effort. And no, I'm not about to be one of those, oh my God, we have to resist Trump every single day people. But at the same time, to deal with the system that we have to deal with the person who's ahead of it, who's in charge, right? And I do believe that having conversations about the historical relationship between, in this instance, bans on particular groups of people from being able to either travel within or travel to and from the United States is relevant, regardless of what party the presidential and congressional leaders belong to, correct? So I'm really excited because I'm getting ready to be joined by Namira Islam. She is awesome. I follow her on Twitter and I've gotten to read some pieces by her. But I just reached out because I really felt that one of the statements that was made, and we've talked about this before, with this point was made to me by Ruth Buffalo about Standing Rock coverage. We have a lot of people giving voice and talking about things, but to have people from those communities actually be present in conversations, it absolutely puts a completely different context. It gives voice. And I'm not doing the work. I admire work that's being done. I'm passionate about work's being done, but I'm not doing the work. So it's so much better for me to have someone who's actually involved, actually organizing, actually doing the work, talk to us, right, about some of the issues going on right now versus me just rattling off second or third hand accounts to you. So, Namira is co-founder of the Muslim Anti-Racism Collaborative, and also serves as the executive director. And I'm really excited for her to come on and talk to us a little bit more about the work they've been doing, as well as to help us put in context some of the issues that are going on, and particularly how the intersection between this anti-immigration, anti-refugee, stance, intersects with racial justice issues, et cetera. The Muslim Arc is a faith-based human rights organization, dealing with education and focusing on racial justice. So I just reached out to her because I felt like she'd be a really great person and timely in this conversation. So, hi, Namira, are you there? Okay, well, she is coming in. I just saw her popped in, but she's coming in and she's getting in ready. But check out the Muslim Arc on the web. It's www.muslimarc.org. There's some great work and programming and stuff. Check them out on Facebook as well, Facebook and Twitter as well. But I just really thought, like, everything that's going on, they're doing some work around like issues with colorism, I saw on their Facebook page that they had said some activities about being Black and Muslim. You know, people talk a lot about liberation and, you know, getting free and social movement building and equality for all. These are not just words, right? This has to be lived practice. We have to have increased awareness as we're moving forward in our work to be able to build out like successful efforts. And there are people who are actually doing that. And this is one group that I've come across that is actually, you know, working to at various intersections, right? Like the website, like I said, is pretty cool. It has different sections, like, because, you know, when people say Muslim, they act like Muslim is race. Hello? Hi. How are you? We can't hear you. I think you might be muted. Hello? Okay, I'll message you the number just in case you need to. Wait, but can you hear her laughing?
Yeah, can you hear me?
No, I can hear you. Yay! I thought I heard you laughing. Hi, how are you?
Good, I'm good. How are you? I don't know, for some reason I like tried getting onto the Google Hangout on my computer, but it's just not working.
Google Hangouts can be funky sometimes, but thank you so much for taking some time. I know you have another meeting in a little bit, so thank you for hopping on. I appreciate you.
Oh, glad to be here. Glad to be here.
So much. I know there's probably so much going on usually, but there's so much more that we're aware of that's actually going on right now with this travel ban, this Muslim ban, as it's been dubbed, from the executive order by President Trump. How has that been, like, through your work and personally for you? Like, how has that been, just watching this all unfold? And then, I mean, there's some people saying, well, this has already been happening from Obama. Is it different now? Is there something different that's happening now, or is this just more of the same old that we've been seeing, or that other people have been seeing? We lost her, but I'll get her back. That's, you know, why we. I'll drop her the number. Unfortunately, Google doesn't like us sometimes, but it's okay. I mean, Google's all pro. Google is all pro stuff until I guess they gotta. Until they have to, you know, I guess, like, promote it or whatever. But this is why net neutrality is important, right? Because if they don't like my content, they can slow me down or bump my guest off. This happened with Dr. Emoja. I don't know if you guys remember when I talked to Dr. Akinyele Emoja. This happened when I talked to him too. Google was shutting off and not wanting to talk about Black Revolution. Yay, she's back.
Okay. Okay,
you're
perfect.
You're good.
Good. Okay. This works better. For some reason, it just kicked me out on my phone too. So let's that it'll stick. You were asking me though how it's been just watching, right?
Right.
I mean, I think it's, for me, I feel a lot of frustration in terms of the work that we've been doing. I mean, we've been around since 2014 is when we first officially launched. And just watching how things have unfolded throughout the campaign, I mean, it wasn't as if it came as a surprise that he actually signed the order, right? Like, right. It was this feeling that he's been talking about this Muslim ban throughout the campaign. He's been really relying on it as, you know, the dog whistle with all the other, you know, anti-Blackness, anti-Latino and immigrant sentiment, sexist sentiment. Like, he's been using this to win the election. So for this to just come in right now, there's definitely a deep sense of frustration in terms of, we saw this coming. I think the other part of it too is just the human cost of his policies, that he just doesn't really care. You know, at the end of the day, that people are being stopped at the border from having lived here. You know, they have lives here. They have spent years getting vetted as refugees. And now all of a sudden, by the stroke of a pen, it's just stopped, you know. I think that is really frustrating. The sensation of I think a lot of us who have taken these overseas flights, it's like, you know that it's these like 18-hour flights. Yeah, and you prep for so long and it's this big endeavor, and then just get to an airport, arbitrarily be told that you cannot enter and that you need to leave again to somewhere where it's not home. I mean, it's or somewhere where you know they're going to be killed. I mean, that's part of it, is that there is life and death in the balance, and we saw this earlier under President Obama's watch with some of the people that he deported. People were killed when they were returned. So it is very serious, and it's very frustrating to watch. At the same time, I think, you know, knowing that people are taking it more seriously, that's been positive. At least it's like the response when we're asking, like, do something, go here, sign this petition, make the call. At least people are responding to that. So that's, you know, the flip side of that.
Yeah, that's a good point that you just made about how, you know, people, because that's what I've focused on. I don't mean to belittle the fact that it's just a basic fact that people are being taken away, but like you just said, it is a long, arduous process. Just the traveling part, right? Not even everything that leads up to even getting the approval. And like you said, with people who are legal residents, green card holders, people who already live in the States, they already have homes here, families here. Yeah. But for other folks who are coming over as refugees, you know, that's a long process, right? That they've already gone through an approval, and there are serious stakes at hand. And for people who are just like, well, it's not that big of a deal, it's just 90 days. I mean, 90 days seems like it can make a world of difference in the life of someone with dire needs.
Absolutely. I mean, if you look at some of the stories that immigration attorneys have been talking about, I mean, the refugee process, like I've been saying, refugees are vetted more than our current president, right? Like they have to submit multiple forms of documentation, which is already difficult when you're having to just like pack up your stuff and flee because of bombing and other really severe circumstances, and you just have to pick stuff up and go. And so imagine like the fact that, you know, if you had to right now, like leave your home with everything you have because you're being bombed or because there's an army coming in or other forces that are not affiliated with the state army, at that point, what do? You know, are you going to grab your important documents? Like people have had to prep for this. And so then when it comes to the refugee process, one, we're not accepting that many refugees. Two, some of the individuals, like they're having to get documentation from multiple international agencies. And then they also need to submit for clearance. Essentially, they're vetting them really thoroughly to make sure that they are not a harm to the country. And so at that point, this is just, I think the frustrating thing about it is that this doesn't make us safer. It's the illusion of safety. And so many white supremacist policies at the end of the day are about the illusion of safety, and it's at the expense of people's lives.
Yeah. So just thinking about all of that or whatever, how does Muslim Arc, how does your work does it fit into what's going on? And or even just building within our communities, right? Because there's a lot of solidarity right now, which is great. But at the same time, we've seen over the last several years a lot of intolerance, a lot of mistrust, and just from poorly educated, you know, interactions. And so how do you see racial justice as a part of the work that you're doing, or even a part of this whole conversation we're having?
No, absolutely. I mean, one of the reasons that we were founded was essentially Muslims in the United States, Muslims globally really, but especially in the United States, we're the most diverse religious group. So we have people who represent nearly every race, you know, down to different ethnicities and skin tones and skin colors. And for us as a faith-based organization, we really talk about the fact that this is divine. It's not something that we stumbled into. And in fact, like two verses that we really talk about a lot, verse 30:22, which talks about the diversity of our languages and our colors being signs of God for those of knowledge. And then the other verse that we really focus on a lot when it comes to solidarity efforts is verse 49:13. So chapter 49, verse 13, which says that God created us in nations and tribes so that we may know one another. And that is where the crux of our work comes in, is that we are of diverse communities. We already have our different like nations or different tribes that we're part of, but we don't get to know each other across those lines. And so when that happens, in a lot of ways, that is what allows injustice and oppression to flourish, is that we don't have each other's backs, because ultimately at the end of the day, we don't know each other as well as we should. And if you think about white supremacy from that lens, one of the things that white supremacy has been really good at is to ensure that it is dividing and keeping people in very, very, what's the word? It's inflexible. It's very rigid groups of where people belong. And so there's very little space for some of these overlapping identities. And one of the things that we see with the organizing work that has been happening, especially since 9/11, is kind of these buckets of organizing. So for example, you have like the AAPI organizing, which is like the organizing. You've got the Latino organizing, the Black organizing. And then when you look at the Muslim organizing, we're seeing a very, the Arab Muslim categorization. And that's often where the organizing has been, while at the end of the day, the biggest ethnic group of Muslims in the United States is Black. So how does that intersect, and what is decided to be a Muslim issue? And so that's where a lot of this stuff really comes from, is that our work is designed to take racial justice in a much more representative way, and to reclaim our position and our role in advocating for social justice as Muslims who are actually look like the demographics. A lot of the leadership, a lot of the organizations that we see, all well-meaning, all doing great work, but they don't represent what Muslims look like on the ground. And so a lot of the issues that need to be worked on, that need to be addressed, are not getting addressed. And that's really where Muslim art comes in, to give a space for people to get to know each other, but then also to have each other's backs, to learn organizing, to learn solidarity, to learn strategically. And one of the things I've been saying a lot, and I think that really looking at this moment especially, is one way where we can see it, is that collectively, when we're looking at groups that have historically been colonized, that have fought off imperialism, and then you're looking at groups that have historically, descendants of enslaved Africans, Irish descendants, like different groups who have fought hard against oppression in our historic kind of DNA. We don't talk to each other. Oftentimes we don't talk to each other about, like, how did we do that, and what kind of skills, what kind of resources do we have within these spaces, but we're just not all together in that space. So that's really one thing that I'm hoping that we'll see more of, is just this cross community organizing, because there are different skills, different resources, and given the way white supremacy kind of puts us in different buckets in the United States, we have different, access to different resources. So that's part of it, is that coming together, we can be a lot stronger. And if we have the conceptual framework, which is where our education work comes in, then we know where to progress and how to move forward.
Awesome. So how has it been with working with other organizations, either, other organizations focusing on racial justice issues, or other, more Muslim faith-based organizations?
It's been really fascinating. I think I'll give you a couple examples. So like last year, I keynoted for the Minidoka pilgrimage. And this is a group of Japanese Americans, individuals who were children in the camps, for example, who every year they go back to the Minidoka camp in Twin Falls, Idaho, and have like a day long of programming. And then the next day they actually go to the site and visit kind of the reconstruction of some of the barracks and the mess hall and all of that. But they spend that time really reflecting on what had happened, and making sure that new generations understand and friends and family understand. So they invited me there, and the reason was because they wanted somebody who had an understanding of social justice, and especially racial justice, and to be able to make the ties between the treatment of Japanese Americans after Pearl Harbor and the treatment of Muslims after 9/11. And this is kind of this very, given the way the mainstream media kind of talks about things and our understanding, it seems very strange to be like, oh yeah, Japanese Muslim solidarity. It doesn't necessarily come up right away as something that would make a lot of sense. But that space for me, ended up being the first time since 9/11 where I was in like a non-Muslim space and ended up feeling completely free, to where I wouldn't have to kind of defend myself or try to push back against stereotypes. And it was a very powerful space. And the thing is that as I was listening to them talk about some of the issues that they had the community had the biggest issues that they were kind of debating during internment, I realized that they completely reflected discussions that we're having about patriotism and all this stuff right now.
Okay.
And it's something like that really essentially, when we're looking at the work that's being done with different organizations, we find a lot of threads that are in common, but we often talk about them in different ways. So when we're in the same space together, we're able to understand where the mirroring is happening and understand how the frameworks intersect but are different. And I think that's been the biggest thing, is to understand when we walk into different spaces that white supremacy affects different groups differently. And that's very intentional, and to understand the different narratives that take root in different places, so that way we can then unpack it and recreate our own narrative rather than just accept the one that's been handed to us.
Right, definitely. So like as you're moving forward, I mean, the work is ongoing, right? I mean, your relationship building is ongoing, the work you're doing is ongoing. But as you know, is this even really a new era? Because this keeps getting framed as like we're in this new, really, really like dangerous era for minorities and people of color. And while there definitely does seem to be a sense of heightened urgency because of the way Trump is attacking things, I mean, like we just talked about, there have been a lot of issues that we've been working to address overall. So how do you navigate this? Yeah, so this is why I set up for patrons and we crowdfund and do things, because the OBS, the free open source stuff, it works sometimes, sometimes it doesn't. But I was asking you before it crashed. I was asking you just about we're in this current era, and there's a sense of urgency like with every issue under the sun. Right. So how do we balance, or how do you guys balance, right? Like this new frenzied pace that other people seem to be moving at, or do you even worry about that with the work, the already the deep rooted systemic issues you've already been working with?
Right, and I think the balance is hard just because for some issues there's new groups that in some ways have not been mobilized. For many people it's like the first time they ever went out to protest.
Right.
So and it's like for them, when they're rushing in, we do want to make sure that we're opening up the space to be like, okay, good, you're in here, now stay in here, but also to not be rushing from one thing to another. The way we really, since we are like a human rights education organization, one of the things we do is to provide that historical education of, hey, reminder, this has happened before and this is how it happened. But then to make sure that we're providing the tie to how it reflects our current status. So that way it's making the thread, the thread of time, essentially the thread of communities that have gone through it before in different ways, and just kind of making sure to reiterate that rather than coming into the rhetoric of like, for example, it's like people saying that the protests are just, it's a new movement right now that's starting. And it's like, no, this has been here, and to remind people of that, there's all kinds of lessons, because one, it's like the historical knowledge of how to frame that. And then also there's the centering of who has been here, because that is where people need to be taking their lead from. But if they're just coming with this conclusion that, oh, I'm just starting, this new thing and nobody's been in this space before, then it automatically leads to the microaggressions, to the erasures, to the minimizations of other people who have been fighting, namely Black leaders, right? So that perpetuates the entire bigger systemic problem. And for us, we are really talking about the fact that the intersections essentially, Black liberation means liberation for everybody. Like trying to really get people to understand that by making the historical ties apparent. And also relating it in a system to be like, this is the framework, we're providing the education to understand it. Oftentimes people just simply don't understand it. They've been taught a certain thing. It's not like our public schools are teaching this for us, right? So we need to do a lot of unlearning and relearning things, essentially relearning a people's history of the United States. And to do that, we use moments like this where there is heightened interest to just make sure that we are setting the narrative that is centering who needs to be centered.
I really like that when you said that, like centering who needs to be centered, as well as pushing back on this rhetoric, because I'm tired of all the headlines, right? Is the women's movement the start of a new movement, of a new wave? Yeah. There's already been all this beautiful and wonderful activism. Mm-hmm. And I would hope that the sisters who helped, came on and helped organize the women's movement would also acknowledge, I believe they do also acknowledge, like, no, we're building on to what has already existed. But the headlines and the spin, exactly. and it does take away from people like you guys who have been already doing this stuff. And even though you're a younger organization, there's still like I always say, like when you look at the past few years, or even if you go back to like Occupy, you go back to the start of like Black Lives Matter, you're starting to see. But even if you go back farther than that, right, like post 9/11 organizing period, right? Like we're in a post 9/11 organizing world, and there are so many different issues and stuff. I remember like when I was in college, hearing accounts of people post 9/11 after the Patriot Act, and people would just get snatched up because they may have had some name or some affiliation, because they might have gone to this, or they might have walked past the wrong mosque, or like all types of stuff, right? And so we really have seen, it may not have had the mass urgency that we're seeing like right now, because certain people are now, their sensibilities are super affected, right? But like we've already seen this growth, and we've seen this resurgence in activism that probably hasn't been seen in the country on this scale in a few decades, but like it's already been brewing. And so I like what you said about how we need to center the voices, we need to center the work, and not that new people aren't welcome, right? But they need to. Yeah. Right. But when they come into the fold, recognize that you may have skills and ideas that are useful. That's great. But recognize there are people who have been here doing work. It's like activism colonialism.
It is. No, honestly, that's, oh my gosh. Yeah, seriously, it's Columbusing activism.
Columbusing activism. Yes, that's what it seems like.
It's not, it's something that I think for us, like as Muslim ARC, like when we started our first 4 months, like we were on the phone with people who were in the space, right? Like asking them, like, what would you like to see, because you have been working in this field for 20 years or something, like even though it was a new organization, even though it was tapping into an area, it's not like we have really another like counterpart organization. Right. We're kind of the only one, which is great, but also like pressure. But in the space of the intersections and how to unlearn and relearn and human rights education and all that stuff. But we ask people who, like, just because you have an organization now, just because you have a logo and branding doesn't mean that the work is new. And so we had to make sure to, and I don't know, for me, that's something where I'm just like one of those people who love elders, right? Like I'm just like, and it's probably because of a lack of elders in my family, like for the most part, my grandparents and my father, like everybody kind of passed away before age like 65. So I never get to really sit with like, 80-year-olds or, kind of these like elders who've been doing the work. And so then now, like when I get to sit with people who have been watching, the country and watching activism and thinking about how things have shifted and how things haven't shifted and where the work needs to be, for me, that's like a special treasure. And that same mentality goes into not Columbusing activism, because it's like people have been here, and then you learn a lot of valuable lessons. Like it makes things more efficient. That's my other thing, is like it needs to be more efficient. Like let's not reinvent the wheel.
Right.
And that way we can build on what's being done instead of jumping things and starting from scratch. One other thing that you mentioned too was the fact that it wasn't even the organizers necessarily who will say problematic things, but then the spin that's put on it.
Right.
And that's been one of the trickiest parts, because it's like something that we can do, but it's the effort that needs to be added to it to keep recentering the narrative we want to center. And people just want to keep going with it, and they want to keep moving it to something that's more comfortable. And we're like, no, like, can we bring it back? But it's still, despite knowing that this happens, it still just dumbfounds. Like I just find it dumbfounding that we keep having to do it just over and over again.
Yeah, it's like the definition of insanity and why they keep doing it the way they do it.
Exactly.
But it's also detrimental. Like if there was a real desire to really help, right, to bolster the work and center voices, they would listen and not just go with what they go with. But I guess they need their clicks and their retweets and stuff. But just in thinking about this space we now occupy and continuing to move forward, right, and strengthening not just I hate the term allyship.
I know.
But strengthening, collaborative efforts, right? Strengthening our collaborative efforts, I guess I'll say. What are some takeaways? What are some points that you think that people should really, take into consideration? And what should we look for next from you and Muslim Mark?
I think the two biggest things I've been talking about has been money and education. So at the end of the day, nothing talks louder than money. And I think it's very... I don't joke about money, right? Like, donate to the organizations that need to be centered, donate to the people who are most affected by the work, make sure that people are being, that you're funding organizations and individuals who can bring the valuable work to a wider audience. Because right now, a lot of it's like, certain efforts are underfunded, and that's why we don't hear about them as much, or that's why certain things, they're not providing certain services or whatever. And so I think funding has been really important, and I think it's really imperative on people to be very intentional about who they're funding. And I don't say that to fund every, just drop money on Muslim Mark. Obviously donate to Muslim Mark, but but essentially things like other organizations, it's like, if we're thinking about, are you donating to No Dapple? Are you donating to Black Lives Matter and other organizations like Black Lives Matter? Or, who are you donating to? Keep that in mind. And then on top of that, I think the other thing with the education piece is that somebody cannot spoon feed you all of it. So there's resources available, and it's very important to go and absorb those materials, and but to be very independent in your scholarship, and in understanding that there's a lot of unlearning that needs to be done, and then there's the relearning, and we want to make it as easy as possible to have the centralized resource where people can go and learn and hear about things differently. But, one of the things that it's been really amazing to watch is how many of our members or people we're affiliated with have made sure to I've just seen their discourse change. I've seen the efforts they're involved in change. I've seen it in myself, but for other people too, it's just watching that shift into I'm reading this book and I'm watching this documentary and I'm going out to this protest, and it's not something that somebody's holding your hand through it, but to kind of activate yourself, and to do that with other people as well, to make sure that you are taking ownership of the work that you're doing. I think those two things are really key. For Muslim Mark, one of the things that we're really focusing on is being very, to make it as easy as possible for people to understand where the intersections are. That's been kind of the theme, is to understand the Muslim ban in a context of white supremacy, in a context of anti-Black racism, in the context of the wall, to understand it as part of the greater system, because part of it is the lack of empathy, because we're not taught to have empathy for each other sometimes. Right. And once the connections are more clear, I think it's easier to put yourself in somebody else's shoes, to be like, this is how it felt to know that, an 83-year-old grandma was being held and detained at the airport without food for 20 hours. Imagine how it must be felt, how it must feel in an ICE camp. Imagine how it must feel in a prison. Imagine, and kind of to be able to let people sit with those stories a little bit more on an emotional level. I think sometimes you need somebody to make that apparent. You need somebody to say it and walk you through that process. And that's where Muslim Mark is. One thing that we haven't, I guess a breaking announcement here, right? Is that we are going to be having a one-day anti-racism training in Detroit, in the fall. So we don't have the exact date yet, but once we have it, we'll be announcing that. And that's something that we're going to be really working on at this one-day training, is to really make the overlaps apparent and to put all of this in this larger framework for people, so that they can come and just absorb and also engage in exercises and workshops and networking as well, to figure out where to go from here.
Excellent. I'm going to definitely stay in touch with you because I want to know more information about that.
Good. Oh,
Yay. And thank you so much. Again, I know you got to get ready because you have another meeting, another phone call, but I do appreciate you so much for taking some time, short notice to hop on and talk. And definitely love to follow up with you some more as things continue to develop and shape up or whatever. But this is great. Like, I really just like having good conversations with people about the work they're doing.
Honestly, I these conversations, for me, partly it actually is self-care. And I told somebody this weekend because, like, I'm talking to somebody, I'm getting to meet somebody new, connect, like that human connection. I feel like we lack often. And then also, I'm not thinking about other stuff, right? Like, my mind is focused here, and it is like, self-care in a lot of ways.
I'm listening to you talk about, unlearning and building with people and stuff. I'm like, this is what we're supposed to be doing. This is what's good in the world.
Yay.
So thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll be in touch. Thank you so much for reaching out. I really loved being here.
Absolutely. I'll send you a link after we're all good.
Okay, have a good night. Bye.
Bye. So that was, short and sweet this week. I didn't really want to do too much because, like I said, there is a lot that's happening. There's a lot that's going on. And I already know that Ben comes behind me with the bam, 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 bam. So I wanted to kind of smooth it out, do a little something different. Well, I do these types of interviews sometimes, but I really wanted to have a conversation with someone who actually is, like I said, doing this specific type of work instead of me pontificating for 45 minutes about, the latest headlines and what's going on. It's, like I said, it's good to actually hear from people who are directly organizing, who are engaged. I didn't get into it with Namira, but I'll bring her back some other time. We can talk more about her work. Actually working as a lawyer in Flint, organizing with low income communities. So there's so many amazing people out there. And yes, social media can be a cesspool. Twitter can be but it also has helped me find and meet so many awesome people who are doing really great work, who are really engaged in their communities and regionally. And I think that as we continue to lift up folks and their voices and their work, we help build and strengthen our networks and allegiances and alliances. And this is how we not only, quote unquote, defeat Trump, right? And this is not only how we push back against this current administration, but how we really start digging in deep and start, tearing away at the systemic oppressions, the systemic issues that continue to plague our communities and society as a whole. That's not just some altruistic, pie in the sky stuff. I really think these are the building blocks to actually addressing these issues, is having these conversations, building, sharing content with other people who may not necessarily even to get to sit here and watch us live. So I do have some new patrons, which I almost forgot. Thank you. Shout out to David, who keeps me in line on track. But I do have a couple new patrons, and definitely, you guys, thank you so much for helping and contributing. Those of you who have, if you have not done so and would like to become a patron of The Way, definitely need every $1, $2, $3, $5, $25 we can get. It's patreon.com/theway-with-Anoa. I just actually was talking with the guys from the District Sentinel earlier. They just launched their own Patreon. So if you have a little extra, go definitely check them out as well. They are now self-funding their podcast, and the District Sentinel does really great work coming out of the Beltway. So definitely go check Sam and Sam out. But I have patrons that I need to thank, and they are Lisa, Nisa. Oh no, it's Nisa, not Lisa. Misa, like mother, like Game of Thrones. See, I had the little guy in my ear. Well, he's not a little guy, but anyway. So Misa, shout out to Misa, thank you. Misa, Game of Thrones is mother. Nick, because there's a couple of Nicks on my list, but Nick, and Becky. Oh, and Becky, shout out to Becky. Becky is one of the members of our leftist ladies group. You guys probably remember when I've done the two women's roundtables earlier. Shout out to Becky. That's one of my sisters from the roundtables. She puts up with me and Wendy and Dr. Amina and Kieran and Q. So she brings balance to quite a few of the ladies bring balance and stuff. But as we're closing out tonight, again, just really think about What issues are going on where you are? There's so many different efforts and stuff. Everybody got an organization. Like literally almost everybody has an organization these days. Just figure out what works for you and plug in where you can. If you're not sure, think about the issues that are coming up in your community. Like we have done, Michael Redwine and myself have been connected with, shout out to Zakia Ansari with the Alliance of Quality Education up in New York. Great group of people fighting for, education, equity, and justice for all of New York's children. And there are so many other groups like that nationwide, particularly as we're facing, the potential confirmation of Betsy DeVos. But they had a really great tweet earlier, and it was a quote with Malcolm X, and I really appreciate it. And I thought that it's actually exactly where we have been, maybe not operating in that space, but definitely where we find ourselves right now. So the tweet itself says, fight, 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 education is right. It's the beginning of Black History Month. And it said it's time to end the systemic racism ingrained in school funding. Fund CFE. And in New York, I've talked about it previously, and I'll be talking about it again because I will actually be at there's a People's March for Education Equality, I think it's called, happening in all over New York State, March 4th. And I will be in New York then for that, which is very awesome. Shout out to, again, thank you, Zakia, for inviting me up. But the quote from Malcolm X is, "We are not fighting for integration, nor are we fighting for separation. We are fighting for recognition as human beings. And in fact, we are actually fighting for rights that are even greater than civil rights, and that is human rights." Because that is actually at the center of everything we're talking about these days. Everything is centered in human rights and our rights to exist as people, and our rights to exist as equals, and our rights to have the freedom of enjoyment of living our lives, raising our families, and existing, right? And so we continue to support each other. We continue to build up good work. I know sometimes I get all free to be you and me, hokey, but really it's that this most basic human to human recognition that we need to see more of. Now, how we actually do that, where that comes from, how we build that out, we need to keep talking about it, and we need to keep working. And I know that we have a short amount of time. I literally have a short amount of time because Ben is coming right behind me. But we need to get where we can get in with local organizing, local groups, and build up our numbers and build up that power, because we actually have the numbers to turn things around. We just don't leverage our voices collectively. We may not have the money, but we definitely have the people, we have the power, we have the energy, we have the tools, we have the talent, as my dad always says. So this has been Away with Anoa. I'll talk to you next week. Peace.
The Way.